Yeah. So, hello, folks. Welcome to API Hack Workshop. Today we have Claire with us. She switched careers from translation and interpreting to tech after completing Lee Wagon's full stack web developer bootcamp in 2020. She is passionate about APIs in the space of integration and automation and aims to empower developers with the right tools for the job. She currently works as a Postman as a community manager and will be enlightening us on Google App Scripts. Over to you, Claire.
All right, thanks for the intro, Gajus. And I'm really honored to be here at API Hacks. I hope what we're covering today will be useful to you all. We're going to be talking about Google Apps Script and how you can make your life easier by automating tasks that you'd normally go insane trying to do on yourself.
Yes.
So just a little background about me. I work at a company called Postman, and we provide an API platform for developers to consume, to test, to document, to build their APIs, as well as collaborate on APIs. So hopefully, if you aren't already using Postman in your API hacks, you will start using it because I think it can really help you out. But we'll play around with it a bit today, and you'll get to see how that works. All right, so why are we talking about this? Well, actually, I just automated a process at Postman that used to cause a lot of pain on our team. And we have a free training for anybody to take to learn how to use Postman. It's called the Postman Student Expert Training. And I'll share these slides with you in the Discord later, so you can take a look at that if you'd like. But it used to take us 2 weeks to process. We get hundreds of applications a week, and we'd have to test them, make sure that they work. And we'd issue digital badges to students. And it was a huge pain point for us because it took a lot of work. Students had to wait 2 weeks to get their badges. So we recently automated that process using Google Apps Script. And it's really handy. I just found that the documentation is not that great. So I'm hoping that by doing a little demo today, you guys can hit the ground sprinting with Google Apps Script and make your life easier. All right, so here's what we're going to build. We're going to make a very basic application. We're going to pretend that we're making a registration form for API hacks. And the only thing you have to enter in the form is your name and your GitHub username. And our automated workflow is going to go out and fetch a bunch of data about this applicant or this registrant. So we're going to get like their avatar, their location, the number of followers on GitHub, and the number of public repos they have. So this is going to automatically come into our database whenever anybody registers for our event. We'll be using Google Apps Script to do this. And if you've never heard of that, that's okay. Basically, Google Apps Script is a script developed by Google used for building applications on top of Google Workspace services, such as Google Sheets, Google Forms, Google Slides. It will look very familiar to you because it's actually the exact same syntax as JavaScript. But it's very handy for coding macros that can automate processes that might normally take you a lot of clicks to complete. It's also free to use with some limitations. We'll cover that in the next slide, but I've linked to the documentation here as well for how to use Google Apps Script with Google Sheets like we will today. So those limitations are, yes, it is free, but you have a couple of constraints. I find them to be very generous constraints. You can't have your script running longer than 6 minutes. I don't know what kind of processing you're doing to last that long, but beware of that. You can run 30 executions of the script at simultaneously. So think about that if you have you're trying to automate a process that needs to run like thousands of responses or requests at the same time. There's a limit on the size of your fetch and post requests. You can only max out at 50 megabytes, so keep that in mind. I find that to be very generous. And the slides here, we link to all of the limitations if you'd like to see them in detail. All right, so here's how we're going to get started. We're going to go and make a new Google form that will be our registration form. It will just ask for a person's name and their GitHub username. We will then create a new spreadsheet for the form responses to go live in. Now, from the spreadsheet, we'll go to the tools script editor. And this is where you can start writing your Google Apps Script code. And I guess the first thing we'll try is a classic hello world, just to make sure that we know it's working. So I'm going to head over to a new browser page. Oopsie.
Hello, Claire.
Very good
Sorry to
Mac.
disturb you. Are you sharing your screen right now?
Yeah, can you not see my screen?
No. The screen is not visible yet.
Oh no, all right.
Okay,
Let
yeah.
me just pop the screen. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not very versed with StreamYard.
No issue.
Thanks for calling me out. 1 second. Share screen. All right, how about now? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, now your screen is visible. Okay, fine.
We're gonna rewind. I'll show you the slides that you missed.
Yeah, sure.
This is what we're building: Google Forms to Google Sheets, getting the avatar location and followers. We did a little preview about what Google Apps Script is. The limitations are listed here. And we were just about to do these 4 steps of building the form, creating the sheet, and starting coding. So without further ado, I'm going to open a new browser tab. And whenever I want to make a new Google form, I just Google Google form. And the first link that comes up will allow you to create a new form. I'll make this a bit bigger. All right, so if I say go to Google Forms, you don't need like a professional Google account to make a Google form. I think anybody with a free Gmail can make a form. We'll say make a new blank form. And here we are in the form editor. We're going to make a registration form for API hacks. We'll just call it registration form. And I'll go ahead and copy the title of the form and make it the title of our document. All right, and we just need 2 things from our registrants. We want their name, and we'll get a short answer text. And we'll make this required so they have to fill it out. We'll add another question and say we want their GitHub username. Okay, and we'll make that a short answer text as well and required. And that's it. We've built our form. If you're new to Google Forms, this is the editing screen where you can add questions. If we want to see what our form actually looks like, if we share the link, I would click the preview button up here. And you can see this is the link people would access to actually fill out the form. But where does our data go when we fill out the form? Well, by default, it will just end up in this responses tab. But Google gives us the option to save it to a Google Sheet instead. So we're going to do that. Say create spreadsheet. We'll create a new spreadsheet called API hacks responses and click create. And this should open a new window that has a spreadsheet, and it's already populated the sheet with the headers that are the data we get from the form. So you see there's the name, GitHub username, and it's even added a timestamp for us. Google will automatically give you a timestamp of the time of submission. All right, so we're good to go. Let's test this out and see if this actually works. I'm going to go ahead and put my name in here as Claire. My GitHub username is Claire Fro. I'm going to hit submit. All right, let's check our sheet. And we can see that it's successfully linking. We have the time of submission, my name, and my GitHub username showed up here. Awesome. So remember, what we're trying to do is take this information and make it automatically go fetch data about the applicant. We want to get the avatar URL, the location, where they live, how about the number of followers they have on GitHub, and public repos. So this is all data that's missing right now. We want it to come automatically. So remember, the step 3 on the slide we just looked at was to start opening the script editor. And you can do that in Google Sheets from Tools, Script Editor. And for some reason, it's using my personal account, so I'm going to switch to my work account. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you enter the Google Apps Script Editor. And this may look very familiar to you, this function definition syntax, because yes, Google Apps Script is the exact same syntax as JavaScript. So if you know JavaScript, you already know Google Apps Script. If you're new to JavaScript, I'm pretty sure what we're coding today, you'll be able to follow along. So first things first, let's do a classic hello world. We are given this dummy function called myFunction. Inside, I'm going to type logger.log. Now, for those of you familiar with JavaScript, you might be used to using console.log to log something to the console. Google Apps Script runs in the cloud and gives us a special logs environment that's in the logger class. So Google Apps Script has provided us this class called logger, and it has the method log, and it works just like console log. So we can inside add the string, hello world, and I can spell it right. I'm going to make this a tiny bit bigger, hopefully, so you can see. Okay, now I'm going to press Command S to save. And you'll see there's a little menu at the top that lets us select functions from the code and run them. I'm going to go ahead and run my function, and it's going to go off and execute our code. So we're going to expect it to log hello world. It takes a second on the first execution. But you can see Google Apps Script provides timestamped logs saying execution started, and this is our logged hello world. So great, we've run our first code in Google Apps Script, but we can do so much more. So we've talked a little bit about using the logging class, and we've linked to the documentation in the slides I'll share with you. The next thing we want to do is install a trigger. So we want our app script to listen for whenever there's a form submission and to do something when the form is submitted. And we'll do that by installing a trigger, which will listen for that event. Anything you see with these capital letters is a Google Apps Script class. These are special built-in classes that Google provides in order to access their API. Script app is one of the core classes that allows us to modify core functionalities of our app script. And we'll use the new trigger method to add an on form submit trigger. So this is the name of the event of when a form is submitted. And honestly, I needed to look this up online to figure this out. I couldn't quite find it in the documentation. So this is my gift to you. You can copy this from the slides and use it. We're going to go ahead and paste that into our Google Apps Script. So you'll see here, we need to actually create a function called onFormSubmit. So we'll make onFormSubmit function. And let's go ahead and just inside, whenever we log the form, let's see what comes out of here. Because Google is going to give us an event as a parameter. Let's see what that event looks like. And the event is going to be an object with various properties. So we need to, in order to see it in the logs, we have to stringify it. Otherwise, it's just going to show up as object. We want to see the actual content. All right, so the thing about triggers is you have to install them. And we'll do that by running install trigger once, and it's going to execute this code and create this new onFormSubmit trigger. So I'll change the selected function to install trigger and click run only once. And it's going to pop up with authorization request. And that's because using the onFormSubmit event requires our permission as the owner of the form. So we'll go ahead and review the permission. I'll log in as myself and say, yes, this Google Apps Script can see, edit, create, and delete my Google Apps or my Google Sheets. I'll click allow. So it's just run the install trigger. And that means we now have a trigger installed. How can we confirm that? We can go over to the left menu and see there's a triggers tab. And here you can see all the triggers associated with this project. Now, it's very important that you have only one trigger here, because you can run install trigger as many times as you want, and you might have 5 triggers listed here. But for every trigger, it's going to call the function that's tied to it. So for example, if we had 5 triggers installed here, it was going to run onFormSubmit 5 times, and we just want to run it once. So make sure there's only one. If you accidentally installed several, you can always delete the trigger from the ... here until there's only one left. All right. So now that our trigger is installed, we should expect the next time we submit a form, we will have logged our event. So let's go ahead and try that by returning to our API Hacks registration form. We'll submit another response. I'll use my same data as before and submit. All right, let's check our sheet and see we have a new row in our sheet. And let's check our Google Apps script. Not here, but here. Well, what happened? What can we see? If you want to see the results of your executions, you'll have to head over to the Executions tab on the left. So let's go over there. You can see there's been 3 executions so far. The first one when we did our hello world. The second was installing that trigger. And the third was that form submission we just made. And this was not from the editor where we manually ran it, but it was triggered by a trigger of submitting the form. So if we want to see the details, we click on this event. And we can see logged here is that stringified form submission event. And you can see we're getting back a property called named values. And if you look carefully, you'll see we have the headers of our Google Sheets. And you'll notice it's an interesting syntax for the data values of a header or any column. They're always presented as an array, even if there's just one cell. So be wary of that when you're trying to extract this data. We get the named values, we get the range. This is going to give us data about which cells were added in the sheet. So for example, we added in the range, the row 3 and these 3 columns. And that's reflected here saying it ended on column 3, started on column 1, and row start and end, it's all in the same row. So you can see that stays the same, 3, 3. We have a trigger ID. And if you just want the values listed, you can get them all under the values property. So this is very handy to know. And in fact, I have a little cheat. How do I switch windows here? My tip to you is to copy this event and save it in your Google Apps script. That way you can make a dummy function called test or something, where you can simulate submitting a form with this data. You'll find it gets very old very fast to have to resubmit a Google form every time you want to test your application. So this is my handy debug method. Well, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go back to our log and copy this event with all of our form submission data, head back to the editor tab, and I'm just going to make a new constant variable called fake submission data. And we'll just give it a value of that JSON object we just logged. And we'll make a new function called test. And whenever we run test, we're just going to call our onFormSubmit function, but with the fake submission data. Okay. So now if we want to try testing out our onFormSubmit function, all we have to do is switch to the test function and hit run. And you'll see it is logging the data just like we asked it to. So we have a shortcut now. All right, moving along. So how do we actually get the data from the submission and use it inside of our onForm submission? Well, we're going to extract those named values from the event and then drill down and get the username. So luckily, since we copy pasted the event, we can kind of look and code it along there. Inside onFormSubmit, the first thing we're going to do is define a new variable called responses. And we're going to set that to e.namedValues. So now we have this property assigned to responses. And we want to get the GitHub username so that we can go fetch some stuff from the GitHub API. So let's define a new variable called username. And to get it, we will drill down into responses. And these headers have a space in them. So we're going to, instead of the dot syntax, use the square bracket syntax. And to be safe, we're going to copy this property name, paste it here. So right now we've drilled down to here. We almost have the value we want, but remember it's in an array. So we just want to make sure we get that first item in the array by getting index 0. All right, let's make sure this is working by good old logger.logging our username. And we should expect to get clarefro logged. So now instead of actually submitting the form, we're just going to run our test again. And we see, yeah, we've accessed our username. It's working as expected. Great. So moving along, now we're going to take this username and make a call to GitHub's API in order to get data about this user. And I assume since you are a couple of weeks into API hacks now, you're familiar with what an API is. Maybe it's your first time hearing about the GitHub API, but GitHub has a fantastic REST API that is actually public. You don't even have to get like a access token or anything to use to get user data. So let's use Postman to kind of poke at the GitHub API and understand how we're going to get the data that we need. Let's take a look first at the GitHub API reference, because as you know, as a developer, the first thing you do when working with APIs is look at the documentation. We're trying to get user data. So I'm going to go down to the users part of the documentation. And GitHub has so many things that you can do with their API. It's helpful to try on the right-hand menu, drilling down what you want. We want to get a user. So let's see what they say here. They're giving us an endpoint. It's just /user/username. So this is an endpoint. We need the base URL as well. I'm going to open in a new window the overview. That's usually where you can find maybe this REST API one overview. Let's see. Resources in the REST API. Looks like by default, all requests to GitHub api.github.com. This is our base URL. So I'm going to copy this base URL for the API, and I'm going to head over to Postman. If you've never used Postman before, it's a free tool. You can just sign up for free, and you don't even have to download anything. You just go to postman.com once you're signed in, and the tool will load right in your browser. So it's quite convenient. Make it a tiny bit bigger. Taking a second to load here today. More than a second to load. My internet's a little slow. Is everything okay, Postman? Do a hard refresh. Well, I think I have it open in another tab. Let's try that. All right, so this is what Postman looks like. Now, to do anything in Postman, you need to be working in a workspace. So let's go ahead to the workspaces dropdown and create a new workspace. And I really think something is going on with Postman. Let's see here. Postman down. Shouldn't be. All right, just a little slow. Sorry, guys, that's a bit unusual. But we're going to make a new workspace called API Hacks Demo. And you have a choice of whether you want it to be a team, personal, private, public workspace, if you're on a team. I'm going to make it a personal workspace so only I can see it, and create a new workspace. So we now have a place to do our work. Everything you do in Postman operates out of what's called a collection. And a collection is just a fancy name for a folder that holds your requests. So we're going to create a new collection. We'll just call this GitHub demo. And inside the collection, we'll add a new request. We want to hit the get a user endpoint of GitHub. So I'll name it get a user. It's a GET request to this URL. And if we head back to the documentation, we need to get our user endpoint. So I'll go to reference users and get a user. We see here it's users/username. So I'll copy the path. I'll make this a bit bigger for you. Base it to the end of our base URL. Now this username is dynamic. We want it to be any username we enter. Postman has a special syntax for these path variables, which is the colon. And you'll see when I added the colon before username, Postman gave us this handy table of path variables. So it's given us the key username. Any value we put in here now will resolve in our path. So this is the exact same thing as literally hard coding like this. However, you can see it's easier to read. Now you know that this value represents the username. And if you want to change it out later, you just change the value down here. So if I send this off, I should expect to get data about this user from the GitHub API. Let's go ahead and send off to the server. The API is returning this data. You can see it has my login. It has an avatar URL. If I click on this, we can make another GET request to see the image. That's my avatar. I don't need that request. We can see a bunch of other details, including lots of links to different parts of my account, my full name, my location, which is needing to be updated, number of public repos, followers, etc. This is all of the data we're trying to bring to automate in our registration process. So great, we found our endpoint. How are we going to call this in Google Apps Script? Well, for those of you that don't know, Postman has a code generation feature. And you can drop down this menu and select any language that you're wanting to make an API call in. For example, if you want to, in the terminal, do a little curl or use JavaScript fetch. This is a native library for making HTTP requests in JavaScript. And we're going to use something very similar to fetch in our Google Apps script, but it doesn't look quite the same. So let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, so how do we make API calls in Google Apps Script? Well, they have a built-in class called URL fetch app. It operates just like the logger class, etc., where we call the class and call a method on that class. You'll see it looks very familiar to JavaScript fetch because we're going to just provide it a URL. The default method for fetch is get, so that's good for us. We're making a get request. Optionally, you can provide a second parameter to this fetch method that will give options, just like with JavaScript fetch. So you could change the method to post, you could suppress errors, you can do a bunch of things with the options. That's beyond the scope of our lesson today, but feel free to check out the documentation to learn more. So we're going to do all of this. We're going to call the URL we just played with in Postman, and we're going to use that username that we got from the form. We're going to save the response from the URL fetch app to a variable. And the important thing to note here is that Google Apps Script's URL fetch app is synchronous. So whereas with the fetch API in JavaScript, you'd have to chain some then or do some sort of async await to wait for the response to come back. This is a synchronous operation in Google Apps Script. So we can just write it like this without any awaits or anything. The value here is going to be a JSON response from the API. And because it's a JSON response, we're going to have to parse it to make it JavaScript. And then we can extract all of that data we saw in Postman from the response. And of course, we just want to try this. And if anything goes wrong, we want to log the error. So we'll add try catch block. So I'm going to go ahead and code this out in our Google Apps Script. So down here, we have our username. Below that, we're going to add our try catch block. And I like to code the whole try catch before I move along. First thing we're going to do is define that URL. So we'll use string interpolation with double backticks. And you know what? I don't remember the URL, so we're just going to copy it right here from Postman and paste it into our Google Apps script. Now remember, this is the dynamic part, and we want to use the username that we got from the form. So we can use $ curly brackets to inject this value into our string or interpolate. Now we're going to actually call GitHub's API and save the response. So we'll use the URL fetch app, and we'll use the fetch method. And we'll just pass that URL we've just constructed. This will make a GET request to this URL and save our response to a variable. Now, if we want to see what we've done so far, we can just log the response. And we'll go ahead and code the catch block real quick, too. So we could just log the error, I guess. All right. Let's see what happens if we run our test function on this. So you'll notice it's asking for new authorization because URL fetch app is yet another class that requires special permissions. You don't want just any app that you create calling external APIs and sending data any which way. You have to give it explicit permission. So we're going to review permissions. Log in as me. And now we get to say, are you going to allow it to connect to an external service? That's the new thing. We'll say, yes, allow. All right, so now we are permitted. And you'll see we got an error. It says the API rate limit is exceeded. Oh, no. Good news. This is a first. So we're going to have to try and authorize our request, I guess. All right. I wonder if we can get around this. Let me see. Won't hit this. If you did, it looks like all you'd have to do is actually authorize your request instead of making these anonymous requests like I am. But you see, I just ran it again after turning my VPN off, and we get the data back from GitHub. This is the same data that we saw in Postman. That's why I like using Postman, because honestly, this is quite hard to read. Postman makes it nice and colored and indented, and I can see exactly what properties I want to get from the response, such as avatar URL. So let's get that data. Right now, we have the JSON values here, but we want to parse it. So we'll make a parse response variable and json.parse our response. And this will take that JSON stringified data and turn it into an actual JavaScript object that we can use like an object. What we want to do now is extract all of those values that we want to use in our form. So I'm going to take avatar URL, and what else do we want? It's kind of like shopping. Let's go to Postman. We want to get, let's see, location here, and followers, and public repos. How about that? So looks like they've got lower snake case as their convention. So we'll just follow that. So location, followers, and what was it? Public repos. And we'll get that all from the parse response. All right, so now we finally have the data that we need to put into our sheet. How do we get it there? Well, there's one more library that will help us out. We will use the spreadsheet app class. This is another built-in class in Google Apps Script. Now, the important thing to know here, like a spreadsheet is the entire, Google Sheet document. Inside a spreadsheet are several sheets, those tabs. So the first thing we have to do is use the spreadsheet app to get the active spreadsheet, which is the spreadsheet associated with this Google Apps Script. We'll call it SS. And then we have to actually get the sheet where our data lives. So we only have one sheet in our response, so we'll just grab all the sheets and take the first one. And now we have S, our sheet. Now we can manipulate the sheet however we want. So this is the sheet has a method called getRange, where we can select a range by row and column, and we can set the value in that cell to a value. So basically, we're going to make this helper function that's going to allow us to pass in a row, a column, and what value we want to write there. So let's go ahead and put this to code back in our Google Apps script. Down here, we'll make a helper function called write cell. And this function will take a row, a column, and a value. Now, the first thing we need to do is get that spreadsheet, or SS. So we'll hit the spreadsheet app. And what was the method again? Get active sheet. This will get the spreadsheet that's associated with this Google Apps script. Next thing we want to do is actually get, this form response tab down here. So we'll get the sheet by going from the spreadsheet and then get sheets. Was it get sheet? Let's double check. Get sheets. Yeah. All right, so now we have all of the sheets in an array, but we just want that first and only sheet. So now we have access to the first, so selecting the range that we want by the row and column. And then we can actually write data there using the method set value. So set value, and we want to set that value to value. All right, so we now have a helper function that will let us write to certain coordinates on our sheet. And that's what we want to do. We want to save our avatar URL, location, followers, public repos to these columns up here, right? So we already know the row of the submission thanks to, remember in our response, here's an example of one. We get the range property on the event, and it gives us row and row start. Both of these are the same value because it's always going to be the same row. We can just pick one of these. We have our row. To get our column, we have to, do a little counting and make sure we map these out correctly. So unlike most things in computer science, columns are counted not at 0 index, but 1 index, just like the rows are. So if we want to get the avatar URL column, we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and location is 5, 6, and 7 here. I'm going to save these as constants just to keep things clear. Let's go to the top of the file here. And we'll just say like avatar URL column. Remember that was column 4. And we'll just copy this 4 times. We've got column 5, column 6, and 7. This one was location column. The next one is followers, I believe. And the last one was public repos. So now we have indexes for all of our headers that we can write to. Now, I'm sure there's a drier way to do this. I just wanted to show you how you can use the spreadsheet app to write to single cells. There's probably a way that you can just write all 3 of these in one line, but we're going to do this several times. So we'll write each cell individually, which means we'll make 4 calls to write cell. And we want to pass the row. We'll have to get the row and the column. For example, we want the avatar URL column. And then the value is going to be, in the case of the avatar URL column, avatar URL. To get the row, the first thing I want to do is make sure that we grab the row start. So I'll go back up here outside the try catch block. And we'll say, we'll just get the row start as is from e.range. All right. So now we have the actual row, and we'll paste that into our, whoop, that's the wrong place, into our write cell function. And we want to do this 4 times for each of our headers. So the row is going to stay the same, but the column is going to change. Next one is the location URL. and you should spell it right. The next one is the followers column. I believe actually it's just location, not URL. Followers. Lastly, we have public repos column, and then the data is each of these values: location, followers, and public repos. All right, so if we save, what we should expect is the next time we fill out the form, we're going to get an event like this. It's going to give us the row that our new form submission ends up in, and it's going to go out, hit the GitHub API, and bring back all of this data about the user. And we can write it to our sheet automatically. So let's see what happens. We'll go back to our form, submit another response. I'll put my name in here and my GitHub username, Claire Fro. Let's submit the form and check the sheet. We can see nothing got written, meaning we got an error. So let's go ahead and look into that. How do we look at the logs? Do you remember? We'll go to the executions and try our last execution. And I'm not seeing any error. That's interesting. I wonder if we hit the rate limit again. Let's see. Did we even enter the... Let's try running our test. Request failed. We got rate limited again. This is so strange. I tried this the other day and never got rate limited. How can I get back into my VPN? Let's see. Good thing we have Postman to help us out, because Postman has an authorization helper. And what I'm about to do is head to the authorization tab. And here, Postman gives us a helper to deal with many different types of auth. Now, basic auth is one of the ways you can authenticate requests in GitHub. And the first thing you do is use your username. And what I'm about to show you is something you usually don't want to do on a live stream, but I'm going to make it read only, so it won't have any special permissions. I'm going to my GitHub. And in here, if you go to the settings and head down to the developer settings, you can go to the personal access tokens menu. And I want to generate a new personal access token. This is kind of like a scoped password. So it's going to give scope permissions to whoever has this token. I want anybody with this token, we'll call it the API hacks demo token, to get the repo data. Let's see, status, deployment. I don't think we need deployment. What status, public repo. What else do we want to see? Don't want any of this write access. User data, we want to be able to see that. All right, remember when you're giving scope to a token, you want to give the bare minimum to be secure. And that's all we want to be able to do. So I'm going to generate a token. Now we have this token, which I will delete after this workshop, so don't even try. But I'm going to save that token here. Const personal access token. And we'll save it like that. With Postman, if I paste that token in here, save it and send, I'm now making authorized requests. And if you looked at this carefully, you'll see you can actually see more data than normal, because I'm now inside GitHub, my account, so I can see more data about myself. Great. So now we're making an authorized request, but how do we put that to code? Well, we're going to have to, let's take a hint from the code generation. You can see we're going to have to pass some options now because we need headers. And Google Apps Script has the same options object that we can add as a second parameter. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We want authorization, and we have to base 64 encrypt our token. All right, so you guys are getting a little extra demo today. This wasn't in the plan, but now when we're making our fetch request, we have to also pass some options. And one of our options is going to be headers, and that's going to be an object. I'm going to have to hit the Google Apps script docs for URL fetch app to make sure that we get the option syntax correct. Alrighty, let's see what options we have. There we go. So what we're looking for is headers. How do we do headers? There we go. It's just, okay, so it has the key name headers, and we give it an object of key value pairs. So we want our header to be authorization, and it's going to be basic. And you'll notice when we were checking in Postman, it says basic space and then this really long string that's not the same as our token that we got from GitHub, right? And that's because in general, you encode your tokens. So it's not like rawly passing over the network. You can't look at it at a glance and understand what it is. So we need to figure out how to base 64 encode our token in Google Apps script, because I've never done it. All right, we have some utilities, it looks like. And let's look for base 64. We don't want to decode, we want to encode. So let's see here. Looks like you can base 64 encode a string, and that's exactly what we want to do. I'm just going to copy this, and we'll go back to our code. We'll head down to nearby our API call. Right here, we're making our headers. And we'll call this encoded token and save an encoded version of our personal access token string. All right, so this should give us the base 64 encoded access token string that we can interpolate into our authorization header, like so. Okay, so we can pass these options now as a second parameter in our fetch request or a fetch method. And let's see if this works. I've never done this. I'm going to go ahead and run this test method that will give our dummy data. And yes, thank goodness. We have data back from the API, but we're getting an error about our getSheets method in our right cell down here, which is interesting because I think I've used that before. Let's go to the slides again. Oops. Huh. I've used it up until now. Did we spell something wrong up here? We've got get active sheet. Did we spell something wrong up there? Let's go back to the slide real quick. Get active. Oh, okay, yeah, get active sheet wasn't a method. My bad. All right, so this is basically an undefined variable until this point. All right, I think, we've had enough mistakes. Things have to go smooth now. So this should have gotten our spreadsheet. We grabbed the sheet so that we can use our right cell helper. We're going to run the test function one more time. And it looks like we got no errors this time. We got data back from the GitHub API. Now, since everything went as planned, we should expect all of these cells were written to the third row because that was our dummy data. And look, finally, we have the data for the user. All right. So it's not normally this complicated, but I'm glad that the authorization restriction showed up, because now you know how to even further make advanced API calls in your Google Apps script with authorization. To try this out, let's actually use another form submission. Let's see. There's an Octocat repo. Let's pretend that they're a user. This is like the mascot for GitHub. And if we give the username Octocat and submit, our registration form should go out and fetch data about Octocat. So yeah, we see that they have an avatar that looks like this. We could use that in our API hacks somehow, like maybe make them a ticket that they can share on social media, etc. Location for our internal records, number of followers, and public repos. So if you wanted to find registrants that are particularly active on GitHub, you could, sort by the number of public repos, etc. Let's see, anybody else? I can't really see a chat or anything, but Abir, what's your GitHub username, maybe? Or anybody on call? Nobody?
Yeah. Wait. It's
Anybody?
not so cool. Yeah, it's not so cool.
Not so cool.
Not so cool. My username.
Is that your username?
Yeah,
Like,
that's my
not so
username.
cool, like this?
Yeah. No, so cool. It's double one. So.
Not so cool, like that?
Yeah, not so cool. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Can I get your name, or do you want to
Yeah, it's Yajush. Yajush. Yajush.
like that?
Yeah.
All right. So now let's hope this works. Submit. Send this off. And yeah, we've got data about Yajush. We've got followers, public repos, location, and avatar. Awesome. So this has been a whirlwind tour of Google Apps Script, how you can get started. Like I said, I have links to the documentation. I had a little bit of trouble when I was first getting started, especially with like installing the trigger and everything. So I hope that these slides will help you get started faster. You're free to copy the code from these slides. I've also made a link to the full code of this app script, so you can just take a look at everything we've coded today. It doesn't include the authorization, but you know how to do that now. But now it's up to you. What are you going to automate to make your life easier? Google Apps Script has a bunch of built-in classes that will allow you to send emails, for example. So you could make like a mail merge app. You can even generate maps from addresses. You can chain multiple APIs calls together. Like in our case, we just did one API call to the GitHub API. But an example at Postman was we fully automated the student expert badging process, which makes several API calls. We have to first, run a test in Postman, and then we have to go hit the Badger API to assign that student a badge. And then we have to send them an email. So we have like a lot of processes in our app script. So we've done a simple example today. You can get very complex and, code it once and you'll just sit back and relax, make the computer do the work for you. Life is short.
Yeah,
I've
Claire,
linked to a couple of
there was
tutorials here.
one thing in the chat.
Yeah.
One guy is asking that, can you please share the slides with him?
Yes, I'm going to
Yeah,
share them
the
in the
link for the
Discord.
slides. Okay.
I'm not sure how to share it on YouTube, but I will share the slides in Discord afterwards. So if you haven't already joined API Hacks Discord, check it out.
Okay.
And yeah. Last thing, we were just talking about the Postman Student Expert Badge, which has now been automated thanks to Google Apps Script, meaning if you complete the training, you will be instantly awarded your badge. Feel free to check out this link if you'd like to learn more about Postman and get a cool badge that you can put on social media. It looks great to employers because Postman is now used by like 98% of Fortune 500 companies, 17 million developers worldwide. So if you haven't already gotten familiar with Postman, why wait? Get to know it. All right. I'm done. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to field them. I can't quite see the YouTube chat, so Yajush, I could use your help if there's anything floating around
Sure.
out there.
Till now there are no questions, but let's see.
Okay. Yeah, if you have questions about Google Apps Script or Postman, happy to answer them. Or if not, that's cool too.
Yeah, I guess there are no questions. So yeah, so that was an awesome session, Claire. I hope now our hackers will definitely try to integrate Google App Scripts. Yeah, so thank you, Claire. That was an awesome session.
Thank you all and happy hacking.
Yeah.